Good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity. Um, I'm going to use my 8 minutes to talk about basically a framing concept, which might be useful for legal instruments such as a free trade agreement, but which may also be useful even if we do not achieve a comprehensive partnership agreement. I say this because, in a way, I have become a little pessimistic because I've been involved with this India-Sri Lanka bilateral agreement since about 2002, and now it's 18 years, and we have made very minimal progress, I would say, in terms of formal documentation. What I'm going to talk about is this problem of interdependency. I think it's very well known that the kind of issues that were raised earlier by, I think it was by Ambassador Gunathilaka, regarding the need to address the political security and the economic concerns, you have to keep that in mind when you talk about legal instruments. So interdependency is sort of the logic that would justify a lot of things that we do in terms of bilateral agreements or regional groupings. This was, of course, demonstrated best by the European coal and steel community, which was the precursor of the current European Union, where countries that were perpetually at war, there were all kinds of tensions, were brought together, and their economies and their societies were made interdependent. Now, the issue about interdependency is that people with baggage, as was stated earlier, tend to be very skeptical or frightened of any form of dependency. So that's where the word inter comes in, which is, if we can position it as you're not dependent on India, but it's an interdependency. India, to some extent, is dependent on you, and you are also dependent on India. And our both common welfare depends on us getting along and having these economic relationships. I think that would be, that works better to address the very real political xenophobic issues that have been brought to the fore recently due to unfortunate political reasons. So what I'm going to propose is something that we had worked out. I think Ambassador Mohan Kumar, who was at that time Deputy High Commissioner, and I worked on some of that language in the original research joint study group, where we basically accepted the idea that the port of Colombo could be an integral part of the southern Indian transportation and logistics system. So it has actually happened. There's no legal basis for it, and there are periodic statements made by politicians in India just before elections, usually, about the need to stop all these payments being made for containers being transshipped in Colombo and so on, and the need to have deep draft, globally connected ports in southern India. I think there's some construction going on near Kanyakumari and so on. And now the latest being, of course, the idea to develop a container hub in either the Andamans or the Nicobars. But instead of that kind of oppositional, zero-sum, win-lose language, if we can get a win-win argument, which is that the Sri Lankan transportation system, and I want to extend this beyond ports to aviation, passenger aviation, and goods aviation as well. If we can incorporate this basic concept into the thinking that the Sri Lankan ports and airports would be considered as part of the larger Indian transportation ecosystem. Now, of course, this would mean that there are some parts of your transportation ecosystem that you do not control directly through your port regulator or the aviation authority or whatever. And that would cause some discomfort among, particularly among the bureaucrats and the politicians. But the question is that if you incorporate this, then I think we have a very sound basis for both countries sort of becoming dependent on each other, the true meaning of interdependency, and for us to address some of the political concerns that unfortunately we are suffering from. I was heartened when I was observing the first visits by Prime Minister Modi in 2014. His first visits were, I believe, to Bhutan and to Nepal. And in both cases, the whole focus was on energy trade. I have spent quite a lot of time in Bhutan, and I know that, Bhutan's major export is, I laughingly say to my friends there that what they're doing is exporting gravity, but in reality, what they're exporting is hydro electricity generated from hydropower dams, and that's a massive part of their economy. So if India refuses to buy their electricity, the Bhutanese economy will collapse. So that's a dependency. But on the other hand, I mean, India can't easily not buy electricity from the big plants, the 1,000 megawatt plants in Bhutan, because their economy would also suffer. So we have a interdependency relationship there. And I also found, interestingly, that during certain parts of the year, Bhutan, though a net exporter, actually does import some electricity up into Bhutan from the Indian side. So if you see these kinds of practical examples, successful practical examples, the port in Sri Lanka, electricity trade between the very small economy of Bhutan and the large economy of India, the bandwidth movements across Bangladesh to connect the northeast to data communications and so on, I think that we have a practical way of operationalizing interdependency. Now, what we should try to do is to operationalize this in an opportunistic way, in the sense that if we can have some kind of legal agreement regarding the ports, let's do it without waiting for the overarching India-Sri Lanka bilateral comprehensive agreement. If we can do something with aviation, where most of the people going through Colombo, before COVID, of course, quite a number of the people going through Colombo, the transit traffic was Indian people going to Malaysia, going to the Gulf, and so on. So why not operationalize these things to the extent possible in legal instruments, so that the overall environment is more stable and less subject to shock? We can then, when it's possible, when the overarching agreement becomes feasible, such a policy window opens up, we quickly write that into that agreement. So if we can have that kind of arrangement, where we are not we're not waiting for this big document, this comprehensive agreement that we have been now waiting for the last 18 years to materialize, but we incrementally make some achievements, incrementally build on some success. And then we'd be able to point out to people, the skeptics, the xenophobes on both sides, that things are actually working and the sky hasn't fallen, and life is better for all concerned. Thank you.